In the heart of the US state of Idaho, there was a group of students. They lived in the same house and documented their beautiful moments on Instagram. A girl named Kaylee from this group posted a picture on Instagram with her 5 friends with the caption, "How lucky I am to be surrounded by these people every day." Unfortunately, she didn't know that it would be the last picture they take together. Moscow, a college town in the US state of Idaho. This town was home to 6 students from the University of Idaho: Madison, Kaylee, Dylan, Bethany, Xana, and Ethan. Ethan and Xana were in a relationship. The 6 friends were very close. They were known for their love of fun and life. However, on November 13th, 2022, the state police received a call from a person saying that one of his roommates was not responsive. After receiving the call, the police arrived and were shocked by a horrific sight. Blood was leaking from the house. The scene inside the house was terrifying, with 4 dead bodies brutally stabbed to death. Before we proceed, let me give you an idea about the house. It is a 3 floors house. Dylan and Bethany lived on the ground floor. Xana and Ethan had the 2nd floor, while Maddie and Kaylee had the top floor. Because the house was built on uneven ground, it required 2 main doors, as shown in the picture. When the police accessed the 2nd floor, they saw Xana and Ethan's stabbed bodies. They were together because they shared the same room. The bodies of Kaylee and Maddie, who also occupied the same room, were discovered on the top level. Tragic as this catastrophe is, it's surprising that 2 of the friends who lived in the same house survived. Who were those 2? Dylan and Bethany. And the police decided to interview them. Your first thought was the same as the cops, which is, where were the 2 survivor girls when the murder occurred? How did they manage to survive? Is it possible that they are the murderers? The police sent the bodies to the forensics department and began investigating with Dylan and Bethany. All they told the cops was that they were sleeping at the time of the incident and had not heard or felt anything until they awoke and went up to the 2nd floor. This testimony was not convincing. How could 4 people be killed without being heard, even though they screamed while resisting? There's something strange going on. What's more perplexing is that there was a dog living in the house. If this dog had sensed a threat, it would have barked to alert those living in the house, but that did not happen, and the 2 girls said that the dog didn't bark that night. After the autopsies, they discovered defensive wounds on some of the victims' bodies, the majority of which were on Xana's. It was clear that Xana fought off her murderer long time before surrendering to death. On the other hand, the police stated that Kaylee's injuries were the most severe and brutal of them all, indicating that Kaylee was most likely the killer's primary target. The killer was targeting Kaylee when they went in the house to commit the murder. The police were confused during their investigation because, as I previously noted, the house was a place for weekend parties. It was even sometimes open to strangers. Even when the residents were not present, any stranger could enter the house.
So where'd they go?
They're just not here. I have no clue where they went. No clue.
So you guys just throwing a party in their house at this
They were
time?
here at one point. They're not here right now.
That is why the police were unable to identify the fingerprints found, whether they belonged to the murderer or to any of the party guests. The police found no strong evidence except a DNA sample, but they didn't know who it belonged to because it wasn't in the police databases, which made the investigation even more difficult. During the days while the survivors were being questioned, One of the university students called the police and told them that he had previously lived at the house, on the first floor to be exact. He stated that he couldn't hear anything on the other top floors. So the girls were probably honest that they were sleeping during the murder, and they didn't hear anything, which is terrifying that they were so close to death, but they survived. After the investigation, police confirmed this story, that the killer most likely entered the building through the second floor's door and didn't notice the lower floor where the survivors were. As a result, Dylan and Bethany were excluded from the list of suspects. Then, who could be the murderer? During the investigation at the crime scene, no signs of breaking in were discovered, indicating that the killer entered the house normally. The police contacted the media and reassured people that there was no threat to society and that the murder appeared to have a target victim. However, they later stated that there was indeed a threat to society and that the murderer could be freely roaming the area right now. The police knew it was the murderer's first time due to the way in which the murder was committed. The murderer was not used to killing. It was his first time, but they couldn't tell whether the murder was intentional, a mishandled robbery, or a crime of passion. There were no other kinds of assault or any stolen things. The person who broke into the house intended only to kill. The detectives suspected the murderer was in her 20s and that he knew at least one of the victims. According to the FBI analyst, this murder would have been too dangerous for the criminal if he had not known at least one of the victims, or if he didn't stalk one of them and knew where they lived. To break into a house where 6 adults lived, they could have had knives, guns, or even phones to call 911. It's a huge risk, unless he knew the situation inside or where the rooms were at least. Kaylee's father believed that his daughter and her friend Madison were the targets of this murder because they were on the same bed when they were murdered, and their rooms were on the 3rd floor, and the easiest way to enter the house was through the door on the 2nd floor. So, the killer entered through the 2nd floor door, where he encountered Ethan and Xana, so he had to kill them to get to the 3rd floor. Then he murdered Kaylee and Madison after he reached the 3rd floor. Kaylee's injuries were also deeper and more severe than the others. That's why her father believed she was targeted. The friends went to play football on the day before the incident, November 12th. It was late afternoon, then they went in separate ways. Ethan and Xana went to a party on campus around 8 or 9 p.m., while Kaylee and Madison went to a nightclub where they stayed from about 11 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. They stopped at a food truck at 1:41 a.m., owned by Joseph, a 26-year-old man. While working on the food truck, Joseph used to live stream on Twitch. Kaylee and Maddie appeared on the live stream while they waited for their order for about 10 minutes. Many people were standing normally, as you see on the stream, but if we look closely, we can see one suspicious person among them who seemed creepy. Notice the guy standing near the girls who was wearing a hoodie covering his head. That suspicious guy attempted to approach the girls, looking like he was nervous, but the girls took their order and left. He followed them until they took a cab and returned home. According to Joseph, this stranger was just standing there and did not order any food, and the girls did not appear to be afraid or in danger. According to some witnesses, the man appeared normal and non-threatening. He may have just wanted to get to know the girls in a friendly manner, but he was hesitant. Kaylee and Madison, as it was said, took a private car. However, the police now had 2 suspects to look into: the creepy man at the food truck who was watching the girls, and the taxi driver who drove the girls home. Kaylee and Madison were seen returning home by security cameras at 1:56 a.m. At 1:45 a.m., cameras captured Xana and Ethan returning home. The police discovered something suspicious after conducting additional investigations. Kaylee called her ex-boyfriend, Jake, 7 times, who was also a student at the same university. However, he did not answer any of the calls. At 2:26 a.m., the first call came in. The last call was received at 2:52 a.m. Madison, Kaylee's roommate, also called Jake. We know that Kaylee and Jake ended their relation on good terms, but why did they call him and why didn't he answer? Jake was now the third suspect under investigation by the police. Jake was brought in for questioning. Jake looked devastated by what had occurred to Kaylee and told the police that he didn't answer the calls because he was asleep. Kaylee's family stood by Jake and defended him and told the police that they would never suspect Jake of murdering Kaylee. The police discovered no evidence against Jake after further investigation. The DNA sample found at the crime scene, which was thought to belong to the murderer, did not belong to Jake. Jake was removed from the list of suspects. After investigations, police identified the stranger who appeared on the live stream near the girls. They also tracked down the driver who drove the girls home, but it turned out that neither of them had any idea about what happened to the girls. They were just random people who ran into the girls on the night they were murdered. There was no evidence linking them to the murder. So far, the police had no idea what was the murder weapon and nothing had been found. However, one of the investigators accidentally discovered a black glove in the snow. They didn't know if it was random garbage thrown near the murder scene or if the murderer was mocking the cops and purposefully left evidence. We have no idea. However, the findings led the police to believe that it was not a crime of passion. The murderer had no desire for vengeance. The manner, depth, and frequency of the stabs, on the other hand, indicated that the victims were being targeted, but the reason remained unknown. One of the things Kaylee's family mentioned was that she complained about someone stalking her, but the family didn't know who he was. The police and FBI worked hard to find this stalker. They heard about an incident that occurred in mid-October. Kaylee was at a company one day. The reason is unknown. But after she left, she was followed by two guys from the same company. Police were able to track down those men and questioned them about their relationship with Kaylee and why they followed her. They told the cops that they worked for a commercial company that needed to hire some females for that work, but they left Kaylee alone when they realized she wasn't interested. That's why they followed her. As far as we can see, that was an isolated incident rather than stalking. There was no evidence that this was the man Kaylee complained to her parents about. Police later discovered that the murder weapon was a razor-sharp knife. Although the weapon itself wasn't found, but this was an important discovery because police searched for the people who purchased this type of knives. It was a particular brand of knives, K-bar. Police found a crucial evidence later. They received a call on 13th of November from a person reporting disturbance in his area. Police went to the area at about 3 a.m. and interviewed some guys who looked drunk when police camera captured a video of the house where the murder occurred. What's terrifying is that the murderer was most likely committing his murder at that exact moment inside the house behind the officer. The police were so close to them. A white Hyundai car, model 2011-2013, was reported to police. The license plate number was unknown. The car was seen around the area, and it was probably the killer's because it was caught on camera in a gas station. The gas station was 4 minutes' drive from the crime scene. Police posted pictures of the car in the hopes that people could assist them. Almost 22,000 vehicles were reported and searched. One of the reported cars belonged to a person in Pennsylvania. Bryan Kohberger was his name. After being placed under surveillance for several days and having his car searched on December 30th, Bryan Kohberger was arrested by Pennsylvania police as the main suspect for the murder. There's some serious information about Bryan that will make you feel like you're watching a movie. But before I tell you about it, let me tell you a little bit more about him. Bryan is a 28-year-old PhD student at Washington State University. Bryan studied criminal justice and criminology. He graduated with a master's degree from the Washington State University. He was also an assistant teacher at the Washington State University. The serious discovery was Bryan's participation in a research project to understand the effects of emotions and psychological traits on criminal decision-making while committing the murder. He was curious about the impact of emotions and psychological traits on the criminal while committing the crime. What psychological changes occur in the individual? One of the study's objectives is to learn how the criminal selects his victims. By the way, this post was removed from Reddit and the university's website. The doctors in charge of the study refused to comment. Bryan became more involved because the DNA sample found at the crime scene matched his DNA. Bryan was visiting his parents in Pennsylvania when he was arrested. Police searched Bryan's house for 12 hours, as well as his computer and car. He was interviewed after his arrest, but he denied any involvement in the crime. Bryan looked calm and confident, according to the cops. Bryan was later turned over to Moscow police. The police investigation was continued with the assistance of the FBI and the general public. After a short period of time, Bryan was charged with burglary and 4 counts of first-degree murder. Bryan is currently on trial. Recently, new shocking information about Bryan has surfaced. The surveillance team noticed Bryan leaving his parents' house at around 4 a.m. and then threw garbage in his neighbor's bins. The items he threw away were recovered by police and were sent to a laboratory in Idaho State. After examining the material, police discovered DNA that was compatible with the DNA sample found at the crime scene. By the way, this sample was very small and was discovered on a navy leather knife sheath. The sheath was discovered in a conspicuous place at the crime scene. It was simply on the bed of one of the victims. Police believed the killer left the sheath in order to mislead them and make them believe the killer was connected to the Navy, but the killer missed the tiny DNA sample on the sheath. According to the report, the DNA sample found in Bryan's family garbage belonged to the biological father of the person whose DNA sample was found on the knife's sheath. Police discovered that Bryan's phone was so close to the victim's house at the time in Moscow. Bryan's phone was near the victim's house dozens of times, beginning in June 2022, at late night or early morning hours, such as midnight or dawn. They also discovered that he was near the house hours after the murder between 9:12 a.m. and 9:21 a.m. Not to forget that the police were not notified until before noon. The important question now is, where was the phone at the time of the murder, which was expected to have occurred between 3 and 4 a.m.? The shocking thing is, Bryan's phone's location at the exact time of the murder was unknown because it was turned off. This information stunned everyone. It was discovered that the victim's roommate, Dylan, slept on the second floor, the same floor as Xana and Ethan, rather than downstairs, as previously stated, and that she didn't hear anything. What's more surprising is that she awoke at 4 a.m. because of noises. She claimed to have heard Kaylee's voice screaming that someone was in the house. However, detectives assumed it was Xana's voice. Then Dylan heard Xana's voice in pain and heard a stranger's voice telling Xana, "Don't panic, I'll help you." Dylan panicked and went in and out of her room 3 times, and the last time she tried to leave, she saw the killer. According to her description, she saw a tall man dressed in black, with a mask covering his face and only his eyes visible, and thick brows. He wasn't bulky, but he appeared fit and athletic. She claimed to have seen him pass in front of her on his way to the back door. The detectives confirmed that the killer didn't notice her because he would have killed her just like he did her friends. We can say she was on the verge of death. She said she shut her room's door and held her breath until the nightmare was over. Detectives learned that Kaylee's dog was barking during the incident from a voice recorded from the neighbor's security camera. It was 4:17 a.m. The dog was alone in a room upstairs. Now comes the crucial question. Dylan heard everything and testified to seeing the murderer. So why were the police not notified until many hours later? Why weren't they notified until just before noon? Despite the fact that the murder occurred at dawn, which she was aware of. How strange. What did Dylan do between the hours of dawn and noon? Did she pass out? Or maybe she did not leave her room due to shock and instead slept. We still don't know what Bryan had in common with the victims. The police are attempting to keep the investigation's details hidden because the case is still ongoing, but we cannot rule out Bryan's obsession with criminology as one of the motives. However, if we go back to the beginning, the codes to enter the student rooms got in the wrong hands, which led to the murder because they trusted people they didn't know. What I want to finally tell you, don't put your trust in anyone unless they deserve it, and have been tried multiple times because trust is a valuable thing for humans. Your information and emotions, or anything you might consider simple, may cause you a lot of harm if it falls into the hands of the wrong people. So be cautious about who you let into your homes or hearts, and to whom you reveal your secrets, so you don't regret everything one day. This is the end of today's story. I hope that justice is served for the innocent university students, and I hope the whole truth is revealed. Don't forget to like today's video if you liked it. Share the video everywhere if you wanted to support me. Thank you a lot. The best is yet to come.